Welcome. Today we will be discussing black box testing and white box testing. I am Shaun Densely and will begin this presentation by explaining what each testing methodology is. Alec Kaasa will then present the pros and cons of each method. Finally, Zachary Newell will discuss the effectiveness of each method as well as how they are related to other methodologies. Black box testing is a testing methodology that focuses on examining the results of the software. The name is derived from the idea that the tester cannot see the internal workings of the software product. Thus, the tester inputs data into the black box and observes the outputs. When performing black box testing, the tester provides various inputs to the system and observes the outputs. These outputs are then compared to what was expected to be output. Black box testing focuses on the user's interaction with the software product. When performing black box testing, the tester is not concerned with the inner workings of the system. What matters is that the expected result is achieved, not the implementation that the developer chose to follow. This allows for the tester to come from outside the development team, thus reducing the chance of bias. The user-centric nature of black box testing requires that the system be developed sufficiently that the tester can access the graphical user interface, or GUI, to properly test the software product. To fully test every possible input would not be economical, so decisions must be made and judgment used to determine the best test cases. This becomes increasingly important with the degree of system complexity. White box testing is focused on the internal structure of the software product. In opposition to black box testing, white box testing gets its name from the idea that the tester is looking at a white or transparent box when testing, allowing the tester to see the internal structure and flow of the software product. This internal focus brings about a few specific requirements for the tester that black box testing does not have. Namely, the tester must have programming knowledge and the tester must have implementation knowledge. These requirements mean that the tester must be a developer. The tester, being a developer, increases the likelihood that bias will be present in the testing process. White box testing is focused on validating the design of the software, the decision-making that went into development, and finding program errors in the code. Because the focus is on the code and not the user's experience, testing can begin at an earlier phase in development. The GUI does not need to be completed for testing to begin. White box testing can also be more thorough because the tester is examining the process flow throughout each step in the code, not just the inputs and outputs. Like black box testing, judgment is needed to determine the best test cases. To completely evaluate every line of code would be tedious and time-consuming, not to mention expensive.
Now I'll go over some of the pros of black box testing. Tests are conducted from the user's perspective, so that will help expose discrepancies in the specifications. There's no programming or application knowledge required for a tester, so a tester doesn't have to know how a program works or how the application itself operates. Objective testing can be conducted by an outside body, not the developers. So since programming knowledge isn't necessary, tests can be done by an independent body from the developers, which makes for more objective results free from developer bias. And test cases can be created once specifications for applications are finished. So as soon as the specifications are done, testing can begin. Now I'll go over some of the cons of black box testing. One con is that there's limited coverage due to many possible inputs, so you can only test so many inputs, so some paths might go untested. Another is that test cases require clear specifications to be well designed, so it'll be hard to design any test cases without clear specifications, which is often the case for a lot of projects. Tests may also be redundant because a developer may already run that test case themselves. Now I'll go over some of the pros and cons for white box testing. One of the pros is that it's conducted by developers instead of users, so you can begin at an earlier stage before the GUI is available. So you can test earlier because a developer can get into the application and doesn't need a GUI to test things. Another pro is that There's more thorough testing because a developer has an easier time covering most of the potential paths in an application than an outside user who doesn't know as much about the application. Now I'll go over some of the cons of white box testing. One of the cons is that it's complex, so it requires skilled developers for testing. So the tests can be really difficult, so you might need testers who know a lot about programming in general and the implementation in the application itself. There's also the matter of potentially tedious test script maintenance if there are frequent implementation changes. So you'll have to keep the script maintenance up to date, and that can be frustrating if the implementation changes too often. It may also require tools to cater to many kinds of implementations and platforms, which may not always be available. And finally, it's conducted by developers, which will potentially introduce bias.
The effectiveness of black box testing can be found in its user-centric approach. It focuses on testing the application the way the customer would use the application. Nothing loses a customer's trust more than seeing bugs when navigating through the user interface. Therefore, it can be very effective to employ the black box technique. Anytime you find a defect by simply using the software is a time the customer will as well. Black box testing is very effective at catching these glaring defects before the application is even used by the customer. Many times, black box is seen as the final step to completing a thorough round of testing. Because of this fact, it is often used in conjunction with many other kinds of testing techniques, which focus more on the application's source code. White box testing is an effective technique in many different kinds of situations. Since this technique focuses on defects within source code, those defects can be found before the application is fully developed. This can mean the user interface is unknown or under development and constantly changing. White box testing is also an effective way to ensure a stable application. Many different kinds of techniques can be used as part of white box testing. When performed correctly, it can be said that the application has undergone thorough testing. White box testing can be used also with black box testing or other user interface testing techniques to ensure front-end stability as an effective, thorough testing of the application as a whole.
So to wrap up, Shaun Densely, explained the differences between black box testing and white box testing and explained what they are all about. Then Alec Kaasa reviewed the pros and cons of each testing methodology. And lastly, Zachary Newell talked about the effectiveness of black box testing and white box testing and how they are related. Thank you for your time. Here is our works cited.